Thank you very much, Mariella, and thank you to AAKP for giving us this opportunity to talk about APO1. What I want to focus on today is some of the pushback that you might receive when you're talking to people in the community about participating in the Apollo study or in research in general. We know that there is historical distrust, especially in our community, as it relates to research. But it's really more than just the Tuskegee or the Henrietta Lacks study. There are lots of other considerations. One of the things that I'm sure many of you can attest to that there's a lot of misdiagnosis of disease in our community. So grandma goes to the doctor, they say, oh, you have diabetes. Grandma goes back in 6 months and you discover that she doesn't have diabetes, she has something completely different. And that undermines the trust that we have in our community. And you see a similar issue developing around COVID-19. You hear a lot about hesitancy in the Black community in terms of getting the vaccine. Well, that's true. People are concerned about the efficacy, safety of the new vaccines because they have been developed with new technology that allowed them to be developed faster. But that's not exclusively in the African American community. There's hesitancy in a lot of different communities. I mean, the issue seems to be one of access as much as hesitancy. But the elephant in the room is around structural racism and the distrust that we have with research and the healthcare community for a number of different reasons. One, I'm sure a lot of you have read about the various race-based algorithms that are a part of all kinds of medicine, not just kidney disease or nephrology. We know that with a lot of the physicians, there's a lot of implicit bias, racism, and that they have a lot of unfounded beliefs. There was a 2016 study that said that most residents and medical students thought that African Americans had a higher tolerance for pain and that we had thicker skin and so we could tolerate needles better. All of that's untrue. And we know that race is a social construct, not a biological construct. And we've had a lot of people talk about the kidney donor risk index and the fact that race is used as a criteria for assessing the viability of the organs that are transplanted, when in fact, when you consider whether or not you have the APOL1 genotype is far more important than race. So people ask, why is it so important for us to participate in research and organ donation? Well, we know that African Americans are overrepresented in the community of people with kidney disease. If you have kidney disease and the high-risk genotype, you're twice as likely to have kidney failure. That means that you're likely to end up on dialysis. The interesting thing is that while the average person on dialysis passes away after about 5 years, African Americans tend to live substantially longer. And while we live longer on dialysis, our disease progresses much faster regardless of the treatment that we are receiving. So the question is it genetic? So if we develop a better understanding of the causes and the progression of kidney disease, we have the opportunity to improve outcomes. And that's why the Apollo study is so important. Now, when you look at organ donation, I can tell you from my personal experience as a kidney transplant recipient, the quality of my life is substantially better now that I have a kidney transplant and I am no longer on dialysis. In addition to having a better quality of life, it has allowed me to live longer. My transplant has survived for more than 10 years and I'm doing fine, and that's great. The problem is that every day 13 people die on the transplant waiting list because we don't have enough organs. And we've seen that African Americans survive as well as all other ethnic groups once they get a transplant. So when you look at the OPN estimated post-transplant survival calculator, it's that index that determines how likely you are to survive after you get a transplant. We see that race is not a factor and it is not an element that is included in that calculator. So that as we leave Kidney Month and we move into Organ Donor Month in April, this is a great opportunity for you to reach out to your community and ask people to be an organ donor. And when people say, oh, I'm too old, remind them that May is Older Americans Month, and the oldest donor was 92 years old that contributed to saving somebody's life. So tell Grandma she's never too old. We've had several people talk about the Community Advisory Board, and we think that the Community Advisory Council, is especially important in Apollo because our lived experiences align with the study participants' experiences. We know that in kidney research, most researchers are white, but on the CAC, most of us are Black, and we have some affiliation with kidney transplants. And we literally have a seat at the table. I love telling this story. One of the things we know is that when we come to the Apollo Steering Committee, we literally sit around the main table. There's some 60 people that you can't see off behind us, and Dr. Friedman, Dr. Moxie Mims, Dr. Kimmel make a concerted effort to make sure that the CAC members are always at the table so that our voices are heard in all aspects of the study. And I want to give you some examples of how we have been able to impact the Apollo study. Some of these are obvious, but there's one story that I love telling because it shows what influence we have. We know that when people have volunteered to be an organ donor for deceased donors, they typically volunteer to be an organ donor and to participate in research. But the CAC insisted that for deceased donors, that we get the family's approval to use those organs in the Apollo research. So it requires an additional agreement to participate in Apollo. And we thought that was important because of studies like Tuskegee, where people know that egregious things went on with our community members, and people had things happen to them unknowingly. We want to make sure that the community is aware of what we're doing with Apollo, but also how it benefits members of the community. And to show the strength of the CAC, there's an organization called the OSMB. They're an oversight organization for Apollo. And what they do is they look at, how the study is progressing, what some of the outcomes are, look at the burden on the patient. And so we had a return of results policy that said, if the recipients or the participants in the study or their family members want to know whether or not they have the risk genotype, we will tell them. Even though there's nothing that we can do at this point about having the genotype, we thought if they want to know, then we should tell them. So the OSMB said, well, since there's nothing that people can do about it, nobody really wants to know that. And in our official Apollo report, so we send back a report every time we have a steering committee meeting, and in our official Apollo report, the CAC said, if you doubt our ability to assess whether or not it is important for the community to have this information, we encourage you to come to the meeting and hear our patient deliberation and participation. So this is a very powerful organization within the Apollo network. These are some of the members that have attended some of the various steering committee members meetings. Here we have the complete Apollo group, and you'll see that we have different people show up at different times because we know that people living with kidney disease are faced with different challenges and we can't always be available. But you can see here, we show up when we can, and whether we're there in person or we're there at the actual meeting, we are active participants in the communication that goes on. These are members of our final in-person meeting that was in March of 2020. And this is the list of the current 2021 Apollo CAC members. If you have questions, reach out to us. Many of the people that you see listed here are active members of Apollo, and they are active members of AAKP. So ask the community to support Apollo, ask the community to participate in research, and ask the community to be organ donors. Thank you very much.